Rain fell hard over the kingdom of Blackthorn on the night King Ronan Voss returned from the border war. His guards carried him through the gates, his side torn open by a rival pack's blade, blood soaking through his armor. The pack healers rushed to him at once, their hands glowing with practiced skill, but nothing worked. The wound refused to close. Worse, his wolf, the powerful spirit that lived inside him, had gone completely silent. For 10 years, Ronan's wolf had not spoken a single word to him. It obeyed his commands in battle. It shifted when he called upon it, but it never spoke, never howled, never showed him warmth. The court believed the king had simply grown too hardened for his beast to feel anything at all. Now, with his body wounded and his spirit withdrawn even further, the healers feared he might not wake again. Alira Vance stood at the back of the medical den, holding a tray of herbs, trying to make herself small. As an Omega, the lowest rank among the wolves, she was rarely allowed near the king, let alone trusted to touch him. She had spent her whole life healing the pack's forgotten ones, the elderly, the children, the wolves too weak to fight. Nobody expected much from an Omega. Nobody ever did. But when the head healer, exhausted and out of options, turned to the room and asked if anyone else had an idea, silence answered her. Alira lowered her tray and stepped forward. "I might be able to help," she said quietly. The head healer looked at her like she had lost her mind. "This is the king, Alira, not some farmer with a fever." "I know," Alira said, "but nothing else is working. Let me try." There was no time to argue. The head healer nodded, more out of desperation than trust, and stepped aside. Alira knelt beside the king's bed. Up close, he looked nothing like the cold, commanding figure the pack whispered about. He looked tired, human. His face was pale, his breathing shallow, and beneath the anger the court always saw in him, there was something quieter, something almost lost. She placed her palms gently over his wound. The moment her skin touched his, something happened that nobody in the room expected. A low growl rumbled from deep within Ronan's chest, not from his throat, but from somewhere older, somewhere buried. His body went rigid. The healers stepped back, startled, but Alira did not move. She kept her hands steady, her breathing calm, the way she always did with frightened animals. And then, inside the pack's shared mindscape, a place every wolf could sense but rarely hear directly, a single word rang out. Mine. Every wolf in the room froze. The head healer's eyes went wide. It was Ronan's wolf. The beast that had not spoken in 10 years had just said one word, and that word had been about Alira. Ronan's eyes snapped open. He sat up so fast that Alira nearly fell backward, but his hand shot out and caught her wrist before she could. For a moment, they simply stared at each other, both equally confused by what had just happened. "What did you do to me?" Ronan asked, his voice rough. "I don't know," Alira admitted honestly. "I only wanted to help close the wound." He looked down at his side. The bleeding had stopped. The wound, though still raw, was already beginning to knit itself together. He let go of her wrist slowly, his expression unreadable, but something in his eyes had changed. For the first time in years, he could feel his wolf stirring beneath his skin, awake and alert, and paying attention to something outside of battle. "Leave us," Ronan told the healers. They obeyed at once, filing out of the room, whispering among themselves. Alira moved to leave as well, but his voice stopped her. "Not you." She turned back, unsure if she should be afraid or hopeful. "Your Majesty?" "My wolf hasn't spoken in 10 years, Ronan said, sitting up straighter despite the pain still evident in his eyes. "Not once. Not during battles, not during council meetings, not even when I nearly died 3 winters ago. And the first time it speaks, it calls you mine. Explain that to me." "I can't," Alira said. "I've never met you before tonight. I've never even been this close to the palace." Ronan studied her for a long moment, and though his face remained hard, there was a flicker of something else beneath it. Confusion, maybe. Or fear that he wouldn't admit to. "Then we will find out together," he said. "Send for the pack elders. Tonight." The elders arrived within the hour, their robes still damp from the rain. They were the oldest wolves in Blackthorn, keepers of history that most of the pack had forgotten. When Ronan explained what had happened, they exchanged uneasy glances. "There is an old bond," one elder finally said, an elderly woman named Sable, her voice trembling slightly. Older than the current bloodlines, older than rank itself. Long before Omegas and Alphas were separated by status, there existed a mark passed through certain family lines, a soul bond, meant to answer only to the wolf of a true king. It was said the mark could skip generations, sometimes centuries, waiting for the right pairing. "You're saying Elira carries this mark?" Ronan asked. "It is possible," Sable said. "Her family line was thought to have died out generations ago. If it survived quietly among the Omegas, hidden and unnoticed, it would explain why your wolf responded so strongly. A true bond does not care about rank, Your Majesty. It only cares about the soul beneath it." The room fell silent. Elira felt every eye turn toward her, and for the first time in her life, she wished she could disappear entirely. She was not a queen. She was not even considered important within the pack. She healed forgotten wolves in a small room at the edge of the territory, and now she was being told her touch had awakened the king's silent beast. "This is absurd," snapped Lord Draven, one of Ronan's most trusted advisors, who had rushed into the room upon hearing the commotion. "An Omega healer, bonded to the Alpha King? The court will never accept this. There are noble daughters who have waited years for the king's wolf to choose them." "My wolf did not choose them," Ronan said coldly. "It chose her." Draven's jaw tightened, but he said nothing further, though the look he gave Elira was sharp enough to cut. Over the following days, Ronan found himself unable to stay away from Elira, though he told himself it was only to understand the bond, nothing more. He visited the medical den, under the excuse of checking his healing wound, though it had mended faster than any of his previous injuries. Each time he was near her, his wolf grew calmer, steadier, as if some missing piece had finally settled into place. Elira, for her part, tried to keep her distance emotionally, even as her duties brought her closer to him. She had grown up believing Omegas existed to serve, not to be seen, and certainly not to be loved by kings. She told herself this was simply an unusual bond, nothing more, something that would fade once the wound fully healed. But it did not fade. If anything, it grew stronger. One evening, as she changed the bandage on his side, Ronan spoke without looking at her. "My wolf has never trusted anyone easily, not even me, most days. It fought beside me in every battle, but it never once felt like a companion, just a weapon I carried inside myself." He paused. "Until you touched me." Elira's hands stilled against his skin. "Maybe it wasn't trust in me," she said softly. "Maybe it was relief. 10 years is a long time to be silent." Ronan looked at her then, really looked at her, and for a moment, the cold Alpha King disappeared entirely, replaced by a man who simply wanted to understand why, for the first time in a decade, he did not feel alone. News of the bond spread quickly through the pack, and not everyone welcomed it. Whispers turned into open resentment among certain nobles who believed the throne deserved someone of higher status. Lord Draven, still unwilling to accept an Omega as Luna, began quietly working against her, spreading rumors that she had used forbidden magic to manipulate the king's wolf. The rumors grew dangerous enough that Ronan called a formal gathering to address them directly, but before the gathering could take place, an accident was arranged. While Elira was preparing herbs in the medical den, a fire broke out, seemingly from an overturned lantern. She barely escaped with her life, and though no one could prove it, everyone suspected the fire had been set deliberately to frighten her away, or worse, to make her position within the palace impossible. Ronan was furious when he learned of it, but Elira, coughing from the smoke, held onto his arm and asked him not to act rashly. "If you punish someone without proof, you'll only prove Draven right," she said, "that I bring chaos instead of peace." Though it cost him greatly to hold back his anger, Ronan listened to her. He doubled the guards around the medical den and quietly began investigating who was responsible, determined to find proof rather than act on suspicion alone. The true danger, however, came only a week later. A rival pack, sensing weakness in the whispers of unrest within Blackthorn, saw an opportunity to strike. Under the cover of a diplomatic visit, an assassin disguised as a servant slipped a poisoned blade into the king's private chambers, intending to end Ronan's life, while the kingdom was distracted by its own internal conflict. Elira, unable to sleep that night, had gone to check on Ronan's wound, one final time before returning to her quarters. She arrived just as the assassin lunged from the shadows. Without thinking, she threw herself between them, her hands instinctively reaching out, not to fight, for she had no training in battle, but to calm, the same way she calmed every frightened creature she had ever treated. Her touch met the assassin's arm for only a second, but it was enough to startle him, to break his focus at the exact moment Ronan's wolf surged forward and knocked the blade from his hand. Guards flooded the room moments later, subduing the attacker before he could cause further harm. Ronan, breathing hard, turned to Elira, who stood trembling but unharmed. "You could have died," he said, his voice raw with something between anger and fear. "So could you," she answered simply. "I wasn't going to just stand there." That night, as the pack dealt with the aftermath of the attack, Ronan finally understood something he had refused to admit before. This was not simply an old bond awakened by chance. Elira had risked her life for him without hesitation, not because she sought power or a crown, but because she genuinely cared whether he lived or died. No noble daughter, no matter how highly born, had ever looked at him with that kind of honesty. The following morning, Ronan called the entire pack together in the Great Hall, nobles and omegas alike standing side by side for the first time in Blackthorn's history. Lord Draven stood near the front, his expression tight, clearly expecting the king to finally distance himself from the controversy. Instead, Ronan took Elira's hand in front of the entire pack. "For 10 years, my wolf was silent," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the hall. "I told myself it no longer mattered, that a king did not need a bonded mate to rule. I was wrong. My wolf was not broken. It was simply waiting." He turned to look at Elira, and for the first time, the court saw something in their king's eyes they had never seen before: warmth. It was waiting for her. A murmur spread through the crowd, but before anyone could object, a deep, powerful howl echoed through the hall, low and unmistakable, rising from within Ronan himself. It was his wolf, speaking freely, for the first time in a decade, loud enough for every wolf present to feel it resonate in their own bones. "My queen." The words were not spoken aloud by Ronan's mouth, but felt by every wolf in the room, through the pack's shared bond, undeniable and impossible to dismiss. Even Lord Draven, standing rigid at the front, could not argue against the raw truth of a king's wolf, declaring its mate before the entire kingdom. Elira felt tears rise in her eyes, not from sadness, but from a lifetime of being overlooked finally coming to an end. She had spent her whole life healing others quietly, expecting nothing in return, never imagining that her simple gift would one day awaken a king's silent heart. Ronan knelt before her then, right there in the Great Hall, in front of nobles and omegas alike, a gesture no one had ever witnessed an Alpha King perform. It was not a gesture of weakness. It was one of devotion, undeniable and absolute. "Will you stand beside me?" he asked quietly, only for her to hear, though the whole hall watched in stunned silence. "Not because my wolf demands it, but because I am asking you myself." Elira looked down at him, at the king who had once seemed so cold and unreachable, now kneeling before her with nothing but honesty in his eyes. "Yes," she whispered, "I will." The hall erupted, not with objection this time, but with a slow, growing acceptance that spread from wolf to wolf, until even those who had once doubted her could not deny what stood before them. An Omega healer, quiet and unnoticed for most of her life, had become the one soul capable of healing not just a wound, but a king who had been silently broken for far longer than anyone had realized. In the weeks that followed, Elira was crowned Luna of Blackthorn, her humble beginnings never forgotten, but no longer holding her back. The pack that once dismissed her now looked to her with respect, understanding that true strength was never about rank, but about the courage to care for others without expecting anything in return. And every night, as Ronan held her close, his wolf spoke freely once more, no longer silent, no longer broken, whispering the same two words that had changed everything. "My queen."